Where did you get that watch? Jonathan Whitmore stepping closer. His eyes were fixed on Annie's wrist, where the old gold watch rested against her skin. The face had faded with age, but it had been carefully preserved. The outer rim caught a thin streak of light from the window. Where did that come from? He asked. Annie blinked. Sir? The watch. Jonathan's voice dropped. I'm asking where you got that watch. Annie looked down at her wrist. She was standing beside Lily Whitmore's study table, the quiet little girl she had been hired to tutor. Her folder was still pressed against her chest. Her coat was still buttoned. She had been inside the Whitmore mansion for less than 5 minutes. And yet the room had already grown colder than the air outside. Annie swallowed. I didn't take it. Jonathan's face tightened. That is not what I asked. I know, I asked where it came from. Annie's mouth opened, but the words caught in her throat. I didn't steal anything, she said too quickly. I only came here to tutor Lily. I'm just what? Annie looked at Lily, then at the housekeeper standing near the door, and finally back at Jonathan. I'm just trying to do my job properly, sir. Before Jonathan could answer, another man stepped in from the hallway. He was a few years younger than Jonathan, but dressed just as expensively. It was David Whitmore, Jonathan's younger brother. His eyes moved from Jonathan's face to Annie's wrist, and a thin trace of amusement appeared on his lips. What's going on? David asked. Jonathan still did not take his eyes off Annie. She is wearing a watch I recognize. David moved closer. Recognize how? Jonathan frowned. It looks like a family watch. David's expression changed at once. He looked Annie up and down. Not slowly enough for anyone to accuse him of being openly rude, but long enough for Annie to feel every small cut in his gaze. Her worn black flats, her simple blouse, her faded backpack, one strap stitched back together, the folder of lesson materials she had stayed up late preparing. At last, David's eyes stopped on the watch. So she stole it? He asked. Annie flinched. Lily sat up straighter. Uncle David. David glanced at his niece, then turned back to Annie. I'm asking a reasonable question. No, Annie said, her voice nearly unsteady. You're not. David raised an eyebrow. I beg your pardon? You're not asking me anything, Liney said. You've already decided. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. David let out a small laugh, as if Annie had surprised him by being able to answer. That is a very nice watch, David said. Custom case, antique gold, handmade strap. Not something a person buys from a stand at the mall. He tilted his head. A girl like you couldn't afford a watch like that. Annie felt heat rise behind her eyes. Jonathan remained silent, and that silence hurt her more than she wanted to admit. Lily pushed her chair back. She came here to help me study. David looked at the girl with mild impatience. And perhaps she took something else before she came here. I didn't, Annie said. Her voice broke slightly on the last word, and she hated that it did. Jonathan glanced at David, then looked back at Annie. My brother is right about one thing. That watch is not ordinary. It is expensive, rare, and not something someone in your position would easily come by. Annie's lips parted, but he continued. If you can afford things like that, why are you here taking a tutoring job? That question wounded her more than David's insult. Annie looked straight at him. Because a person can own something meaningful and still need a paycheck. David gave a dry laugh. That sounds rehearsed. It isn't, Annie said quickly. I didn't take it. I already told you, I didn't take it. Jonathan's face remained unreadable. Annie felt the room closing in around her. I don't know what you think happened before I walked in here, Annie said, trying to keep her voice calm. But I did not come into your house with a plan. I did not steal from you. I did not steal from anyone. David folded his arms. Then explain why it is on your wrist. I am trying to explain, Annie said. But every time I open my mouth, you look at me as if the conclusion has already been made. Jonathan did not answer. Annie looked down at the folder in her hands. On the first page, she had written Lily's name in blue ink. Beneath it were 3 simple questions to begin the lesson. Which subject feels hardest for you? What kinds of books do you like? What helps you learn better when you feel stuck? Now, it all seemed painfully naive. Her eyes burned, but she forced the tears back. I didn't think my first day of tutoring would begin with being accused of stealing, she said. I thought I was coming here to help a little girl with her homework. Lily lowered her head. For a moment, even David said nothing. Jonathan's expression shifted slightly, but not enough to become kindness. Then tell me, he said. Where did you get it? Before Annie could answer, a woman's voice came from the archway. Jonathan, what is going on? A woman entered the living room. She wore a cream blouse and dark trousers, her hair pinned neatly at the back of her neck, her phone still in her hand. Annie recognized her from the family photographs in the hallway. It was Victoria Whitmore, Jonathan's wife. Victoria looked from Jonathan to David, then to Annie. Her eyes stopped on the watch. Jonathan said, "I believe she is wearing a watch that belongs to this family." Victoria's face tightened immediately. She stepped closer. Then she must have taken it. Annie held her breath. "Ma'am, I didn't." Victoria raised a hand to stop her before she could finish. "A watch like that costs more than some people make in a year. Do you expect us to believe you simply walked in here wearing it by coincidence?" "I didn't walk in here by coincidence," Annie said, her voice trembling. "I was hired to tutor your daughter." Victoria's eyes moved over Annie's clothes, her old shoes, her backpack, and the folder she held tightly to her chest. "Exactly. And if you can afford such an expensive watch, why would you need a tutoring job?" David nodded, as if someone had finally said exactly what he had been trying to say. "That is what I was trying to point out." Lily stood, small but tense. "Mom, she hasn't even taught me yet." Victoria gave her daughter a sharp look. "Lily, this has nothing to do with your lesson." Annie pressed her lips together. Her throat ached. The tears she had been trying to hold back now began to fall too quickly. "I did not steal it," she said again. "I don't know how many ways I can say that." Victoria's eyes returned to the watch. She seemed ready to speak again, but then she stopped. She frowned. "Wait," Victoria said slowly. Jonathan turned to her. "What?" Victoria leaned closer, staring at the gold rim. "That watch looks familiar." David frowned. "Of course it does. Jonathan just said it looks like a family watch." "No," Victoria said more quietly. "I mean, I've seen it before." Her eyes returned to Annie, sharper than before. "Explain yourself. Right now, where did you get it?" At that moment, something inside Annie broke. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I have been trying to explain," she said, her voice shaking. "Since the moment I stepped into this house, everyone has been talking over me. I came here for my first tutoring session, and before I could even sit down, I was accused of stealing." No one moved. Annie quickly wiped the tear away, ashamed that she had cried. But she kept speaking, because if she stopped now, they would use her silence against her. "Every time I open my mouth, someone says I must have stolen it. Someone says I couldn't afford it. Someone looks at my shoes, my bag, my job, and decides those things tell them everything about me." Victoria's expression changed, though Annie could not tell whether it was shame or irritation. "I did not steal your watch," Annie said, her voice almost pleading. "I did not steal anyone's watch. I did not come here to be humiliated in front of a child I was supposed to help." Lily lowered her head. Jonathan looked at his daughter, then back at Annie. Annie gripped the folder so tightly that the corners of the papers bent. "I was nervous before I came here," she said. "My mother told me to be polite, to do my best, and to remember that work is still work, even if the house is bigger than anything we've ever known. So I came early. I brought lesson plans. I brought practice exercises. I came here ready to work." Her voice trembled again, but this time she did not stop. "And all of you looked at me as if I had already done something wrong." David shifted his weight but said nothing. Victoria looked away first, if only for a second. Jonathan pressed his lips together. He seemed trapped between anger, suspicion, and something uncertain beginning to creep in. He still wanted the truth about the watch. Clara Bennett, the housekeeper standing near the door, lowered the tray in her hand slightly. Her eyes rested on Annie with quiet concern. "Miss Carter," Clara said gently, "would you like to sit down?" Annie shook her head. "No, ma'am. If I sit, they'll think I'm too afraid to stand." The sentence struck the room harder than she expected. Lily took a small step away from the table. "I don't think that." Annie looked at the girl. Lily's voice was very small, but it was the first kind thing anyone in that family had said to her since the questioning began. "Thank you," Annie whispered. Jonathan took a slow breath. "No one meant to frighten you." Annie looked at him with wet eyes. "Then why do I feel like everyone is waiting for me to confess to something I didn't do?" He had no ready answer. David cleared his throat. "This is becoming far too emotional. We still don't know where she got the watch." Annie turned to him. "Because you keep interrupting me before I can tell you." Victoria folded her arms. "Then say it." Annie looked at each of them. David, with his suspicious eyes. Victoria, with her confident disbelief. Jonathan with his heavy caution. Clara, with her quiet concern. Lily, with the confusion and compassion of a child. Then Annie looked down at the watch. The gold rim caught the light again. She lifted her head. "I will explain," Annie said. but I will not do it if you keep calling me a thief between every sentence." Jonathan narrowed his eyes. David opened his mouth, then closed it again. Victoria's fingers tightened around her phone. Lily looked from Annie to her father. The whole room waited. The watch ticked softly on Annie's wrist, steady and small, the only thing still calm in a room full of judgment. Jonathan looked at Annie for a long time. The silence in the living room had become more uncomfortable than the accusations from moments earlier. Victoria still held her phone at her side. Her fingers tightened around the case. David stood near the fireplace, his arms folded across his chest, his expression still full of suspicion. Mrs. Clara stood by the door, the tray in her hands lowered a few inches, and Lily sat beside the study table, silently watching the adults with eyes that were both confused and frightened. Annie kept her head high, but inside, she was using every bit of strength she had not to turn and run. She could leave, but if she left this room now, they would keep telling the story they had built from the beginning. A poor black tutor had walked into the Whitmore mansion with a stolen watch on her wrist. At last, Jonathan spoke. "No one is going to call you anything between sentences now. No one is going to interrupt you halfway through. Explain." Annie looked at him. "That still doesn't sound like listening." Jonathan pressed his lips together. "I am listening." David exhaled softly through his nose. "Then she should start talking." Annie turned toward him. "You have already said plenty, Mr. Whitmore." David's eyebrow lifted. He looked almost amused, but beneath that amusement was clear irritation. "Careful? Careful about what?" Annie asked. "My tone? My words? My face? I have been careful since the moment I got out of the car at your gate." Jonathan cut in. "David." Just one word, but it was enough to make David stop. Victoria stepped closer. Her voice was softer now, but not kinder. "Miss Carter, you have to understand how this looks." Annie almost smiled, but there was too much pain in it. "Ma'am, I understand exactly how you think it looks. That is the problem." Victoria's face stiffened. Mrs. Clara spoke gently. "Let the girl speak." David turned toward her. "Clara, this is family property. Then the truth should matter even more to this family," Clara replied. Her voice was not loud, but every word landed in the room with clear weight. Jonathan's eyes shifted to Clara, then back to Annie. "Tell us what happened." Annie took a deep breath. She looked down at the watch on her wrist one more time. "It happened 2 years ago," she began. "I was on my way home from the library. There's a pharmacy on Harris Street, near the bus stop. I stopped there because my mother told me to buy cough drops before I came home." Jonathan did not interrupt. Annie continued. "It was starting to get cold, not freezing, but cold enough that people were walking fast. I saw an elderly woman near the parking lot. She was holding a paper bag from the pharmacy and a purse. 2 men were walking up behind her." Victoria's eyes flicked briefly toward the watch. "They were dressed like anyone else," Annie said. "Hoodies, jeans. One of them grabbed her purse. The other blocked her way. It happened so fast," she stumbled. Her bag of medicine fell, and the bottles rolled under a parked car. Lily's hand tightened around the back of her chair. But she stayed silent. Annie swallowed. Everyone saw it. A man near the gas station looked over and kept walking. A woman got into her car and locked the door. I don't blame them. I was scared too. I just stood there with a backpack full of books, thinking surely some adult would help. She paused. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. But no one did. Annie drew in a breath. So I yelled. I yelled as loudly as I could. I told them I was calling the police, even though my phone was almost dead. I threw my backpack down near them, not at them, just hard enough to make noise. One of the men turned to look at me, and that moment gave the woman 1 second to get away. David shifted slightly, as if the story was moving in a direction he did not like. I ran to her, Annie continued. I helped her up. She was shaking so badly she could barely hold my hand. I got her inside the pharmacy, and the cashier locked the door until the 2 men left. She looked down for a moment, that's all. It wasn't like a movie. I didn't fight anyone. I didn't save the whole world. I just didn't leave her alone. Jonathan looked at the watch, then back at Annie. Something on his face changed slightly. Victoria asked, "And that woman gave you this watch?" "Not right away," Annie said. "First, she sat in the chair by the blood pressure machine because she was dizzy. The cashier gave her water in a paper cup. She kept saying she was fine, but her hands were shaking badly." Mrs. Clara lowered her eyes. Annie noticed something strange on the older woman's face. Maybe recognition, maybe sadness. "She asked my name," Annie said. "I told her I was Annie. Just Annie." She asked if she could call someone for me, but I said no. My mother was working a double shift, and I didn't want to scare her. Jonathan's voice lowered. Why didn't you stay and wait for the police? Annie looked at him. Because I was afraid. Of the police? Of everything, she said. Of getting home late. Of making my mother worry. Of those men coming back. Of standing there and having to explain why I was involved. I know that may not make sense to you. Jonathan did not answer. Annie gave a small nod, as if his silence had confirmed what she had just said. So when the cashier said the police were coming, I told the woman I had to go. And she gave you the watch, David said. But this time, his voice was less mocking. Annie turned to him. She took it off her wrist and put it in my hand. I told her no. I told her I couldn't accept something like that. I didn't even know how much it was worth, but I knew it was too expensive. Lily asked very softly, "What did she say?" Jonathan turned toward his daughter, seeming ready to stop her. But Lily's question was not rude or childish. It was quiet and sincere. He let her ask. For the first time, Annie's expression softened. She said, "Sometimes people hold on to the wrong things and forget to value the right ones." I didn't understand what she meant. Then she said, "You saw an old woman in danger, and you stepped closer when everyone else stepped away." Mrs. Clara gently set the tray down on the side table. Annie continued, "I still tried to give it back, but she held my hand very tightly. She said, 'Keep it, not because it is expensive, because I want you to remember what you did when fear told you to turn away.'" Victoria's hand rose to her throat, but she said nothing. Annie looked at Jonathan. "That is how I got it." For several seconds, no one spoke. Then David said, "And we're supposed to believe this woman just happened to be connected to this family?" Annie's face became serious. "I didn't know she was connected to your family. I didn't know this house existed. I didn't even know your name until the tutoring center sent me the address." Jonathan asked, "Did she tell you her full name?" "No." "Did she give you a business card?" "No." "A phone number?" "No." David spread his hands. "You see the problem." Annie looked at him wearily. "The problem is that nothing I say is convincing enough if it doesn't come with paperwork. In this house," David said, "expensive things are documented. In my life," Annie replied, "kindness doesn't always come with a receipt." Mrs. Clara looked up at her. Victoria still was not finished. "Then why wear it here? On your very first day? If you knew it looked expensive, why not leave it at home?" "Because it matters to me," Annie said. "I wear it when I'm nervous." "Were you nervous about coming here?" Annie looked around the living room. "Don't you think I should have been?" The question hung in the air, clear and uncomfortable. Lily looked at her father. "Dad, can we check? Maybe Grandma wrote something about it." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Lily, she wrote everything down," Lily said. "You always say that." David shook his head. "We cannot turn this into a treasure hunt because the tutor has a story." Mrs. Clara stepped forward. "Mr. David, your mother did keep journals." Jonathan's face stiffened. Victoria turned to Clara. "Do you think there could be something?" "I don't know," Clara said. "But I remember the day Mrs. Whitmore came home looking very strange. I remember she asked me whether brave people are born brave, or whether they become brave because no one else steps forward to protect the weak." Annie held her breath. Clara looked at her. This time, there was no doubt left in her eyes. "At the time, I thought it was a strange question." Jonathan turned toward the hallway, where family portraits lined the wall. Annie followed his gaze. In one large photograph, an elderly woman stood beside Jonathan. She wore a small but warm smile, one hand resting lightly on his arm. The watch was not clearly visible in the photograph, but Annie recognized something else. The posture, the slight lift of her chin, the calm, familiar eyes that had once looked at her outside the pharmacy. Annie's throat tightened. "That's her," Annie said before she could stop herself. Jonathan turned sharply. "What?" Annie nodded toward the photograph. "The woman in that picture. If this scene touched your heart, please like this video, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about truth, courage, and second chances." For the first time that afternoon, Jonathan did not answer immediately. David stared at the portrait, then at Annie. Victoria's face went so pale that her makeup could not hide it. Lily looked at the picture of her grandmother, then back at the tutor she had known for less than an afternoon. Mrs. Clara whispered, "Mrs. Eleanor." Tears rose in Annie's eyes again, but this time the feeling was completely different. It was not only humiliation, it was a sorrow deeper and larger than herself. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear I didn't know who she was." Jonathan took one step toward the portrait. then stopped. David cleared his throat, but even he no longer sounded certain. A photograph doesn't prove. No, Jonathan said. Everyone turned to him. He was still looking at the portrait. No, it doesn't prove everything. Then he turned back to Annie. But it proves we need to know more. Annie hugged the folder tightly to her chest, still standing in the same place where she had been since the first question was asked. She was tired. Her feet hurt. Her face was hot from crying. She wanted her mother. She wanted to sit on the bus and go home. She wanted the day to start over and become the simple tutoring session she had hoped for. But the watch kept ticking on her wrist, steady as a small witness. Jonathan looked toward Clara. Where are my mother's journals? Clara hesitated. In her room, sir. The blue ones are in the nightstand drawer. The older ones may still be on the writing desk. Victoria said. Jonathan, are you sure? He looked at his wife, then at David, then at Annie. No, he said. I'm not sure of anything anymore. Jonathan started toward the hallway, then stopped and turned back. Miss Carter, he said, his voice softer than before. If you want, you may come with us. Annie looked at Lily, then at Clara, then at the photograph of the woman from the pharmacy. She still did not trust Jonathan, but she trusted the woman who had once held her hand and told her not to let fear decide who she would become. Annie nodded. I'll come, she said. But the watch stays on my wrist. Jonathan looked at the watch one more time. Then he gave a small nod. Jonathan led the way down the hall. But he did not walk with the certainty Annie had seen in him earlier. His steps were slower now, as if every framed photograph on the wall had become a question. Annie followed a few feet behind him, with Lily at her side and Mrs. Clara close enough to make sure no one treated her like she was being marched somewhere. Victoria came after them, quiet for once, her phone gripped in one hand but unused. David trailed behind, looking irritated by the fact that the room had not settled back into his version of the truth. The hallway seemed longer than it had when Annie first arrived. Family portraits lined the cream-colored walls. Jonathan as a young man in a tuxedo. Victoria in a formal dress at some charity dinner. Lily as a little girl holding a ribbon from a horse show. And there, again and again, the older woman from the pharmacy appeared in silver frames. Eleanor Whitmore, smiling in gardens, seated at holiday tables, standing beside Jonathan at what looked like a hospital fundraiser. Annie slowed near one photograph. Eleanor was wearing a pale blue coat in it, the same soft color Annie remembered from that day outside Harris Pharmacy. Her hair was pinned at the back of her neck. Her smile was gentle, but there was a little sadness in her eyes, the kind Annie had noticed even before the robbery, when the woman had tried to stand and insisted she was all right. Lily noticed Annie staring. That was Grandma's favorite coat. Annie nodded. She had it on that day. Jonathan stopped. He turned around, and for a moment his face was unreadable. You remember her coat? Yes, Annie said. It had a loose button near the collar. Mrs. Clara drew in a quiet breath. I sewed that button back on the next morning. David looked from Clara to Annie. A loose button doesn't prove anything. Anyone can look at a picture and make up a detail. Annie turned to him. She was tired of his voice, tired of the way he kept reaching for doubt like it was a glass of water. The picture doesn't show the loose button. David opened his mouth, then looked back at the photograph. The coat was smooth, the collar turned away from the camera. Nothing in the frame showed what Annie had just described. Victoria looked down. Jonathan said nothing. He continued toward the staircase. They climbed to the second floor, where the air felt different, quieter and warmer. The noises from downstairs faded behind them. Annie heard the soft brush of Lily's shoes on the runner, the small click of Victoria's heels, the heavier steps of the men behind her. She held her folder against her chest, though the papers inside no longer mattered. Lily's lesson had become something else. At the end of the hall, Jonathan stopped before a closed door. His hand went to the brass knob, then paused. No one pushed him. Even David had the sense to stay quiet. Mrs. Clara spoke gently. Sir, I can open it. Jonathan shook his head. No, he turned the knob himself. The door opened into a bedroom kept too carefully, not dusty, not neglected, but preserved. A pale quilt lay smooth across the bed. A reading chair sat near the window with a folded blanket across one arm. There was a small table with a lamp, a Bible, and a pair of glasses. On the dresser sat a silver hairbrush, a bottle of perfume, and a framed picture of Lily, as a child missing one front tooth. Annie stayed near the doorway. It felt wrong to step in too quickly. This was not just a room. It was the shape someone left behind. Lily walked in first, quietly. Dad never lets anyone come in here. Jonathan's face tightened, but he did not correct her. Victoria moved to the dresser and touched the perfume bottle with 2 fingers. She wore this every Sunday. Mrs. Clara went to the bedside table. Mrs. Whitmore kept her recent journals here. The older ones were in the writing desk. Jonathan remained by the door, one hand still on the knob. Annie saw then that his anger downstairs had been easier for him than this. Anger gave a man something to do with his hands. Grief did not. Clara opened the top drawer, then the second. Inside were several small journals, each with a cloth cover and a year written on a paper label. She lifted a blue one and looked at the date. This would be the year, she said. David stepped forward. Are we really doing this? Reading private journals because a stranger says she helped Mother? Clara looked at him with more firmness than Annie expected. Your mother asked me once to remember the girl if she ever came up again. David frowned. Why would she say that? I don't know, Clara said. Maybe because she knew this family forgets things that make it uncomfortable. Victoria glanced at Jonathan. He did not defend the family. That alone felt like a shift. Clara handed the journal to him. Jonathan stared at it. His thumb moved over the blue cloth cover. For several seconds he only held it. Annie wondered when he had last touched something his mother used every day. She wondered if grief was different in a mansion. Maybe the rooms were bigger, but the missing person still left the same kind of empty chair. Jonathan opened the journal carefully. The first pages were ordinary. Weather notes. A reminder to call Lily after school. A line about tomato soup being too salty. A note about a church friend's hip surgery. The small details made Eleanor feel more real to Annie, not like the rich woman everyone kept circling, but like the old lady who had sat in a plastic pharmacy chair and worried more about Annie getting home than about her own shaking hands. Jonathan turned pages until Clara leaned closer. Late October, she said. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember because I had made chicken pot pie, and she never ate it. Annie almost smiled at the detail. Chicken pot pie. Something warm waiting in a house like this while she had gone home to leftover rice and canned green beans. 2 different lives, crossing for 10 frightened minutes outside a pharmacy. Jonathan found the date. His eyes moved over the page. No one breathed loudly. Then his face changed. Victoria whispered, Jonathan? He did not answer at first. His jaw worked once, as if the words had caught there. Lily stepped closer. Dad? Jonathan read aloud, his voice lower than before. I was careless today. I thought I could stop for my prescription without asking Marcus to drive me. I wanted one afternoon where I was not treated like glass. Marcus, Annie thought, the driver from downstairs, so Eleanor had known what it meant to want a little freedom from being watched. Jonathan continued. 2 young men tried to take my purse outside Harris Pharmacy. I fell. Several people saw and did what frightened people do. They protected themselves. David looked away toward the window. Jonathan's hand tightened around the journal. Then a girl came running, he read. A young black girl with a school backpack and more courage than anyone else in that parking lot. She shouted, made enough noise to scare them off, and helped me inside. Her hands were shaking. She kept asking if I could breathe. Lily looked at Annie. Annie's throat tightened. Jonathan read more slowly now. Her name was Annie. I did not get her last name. She left before the police came. I cannot blame her. A child should not have to be brave, and then be questioned for surviving her own bravery. The room went very quiet. Annie blinked hard. She had not known Eleanor understood that part. She had thought the old woman might have been offended when Annie left so quickly. She had carried a small guilt for 2 years, wondering whether she should have stayed longer, whether she had seemed rude, whether she had abandoned someone she had just helped. But Eleanor had understood. Jonathan lowered the journal a little. His eyes did not meet Annie's. Victoria's face had softened, but she looked troubled too, as if her earlier words were now returning to stand beside her. David cleared his throat. It says Annie. There are many girls named Annie. Mrs. Clara's eyes flashed. David, I'm just saying what everyone is thinking. No, Lily said. Everyone turned to her. She stood near the bed, small and pale, but her voice was steady. You're saying what you want to think. David stared at her, surprised. Jonathan looked at his daughter for a long second, then turned another page. There's more, he said. His voice had changed. It sounded less like a man searching for a mistake and more like one afraid of finding himself inside one. He read again. I gave her the gold watch. She refused twice. Such a serious child, so careful not to take what she had not earned. I told her courage should not leave empty-handed. She looked at me as if adults had not often thanked her properly. Annie closed her eyes for a second. That sentence hurt because it was true in a way she had never said aloud. People thanked her mother for working long shifts at the hospital, but not enough. People thanked Annie at school when she helped other students, but mostly because it was convenient. Eleanor had thanked her like the act mattered. Jonathan turned the page, then stopped. His voice lowered further. I hope I see her again. If Jonathan ever meets her, I pray he will be kind. He has a good heart under all that armor. But sometimes he mistakes suspicion for wisdom. Victoria looked at her husband. Jonathan shut his eyes briefly. David said nothing now. Annie did not feel triumphant. She had imagined, maybe, that if proof ever came, it would feel like standing taller. Instead, it felt heavy. Proof should not have been necessary for basic. Jonathan closed the journal halfway, then opened it again as if he owed the page his full attention. There is one more line, he said. He read it. But this time his voice nearly broke. If the watch is ever questioned, let it be known clearly. I gave it to Annie freely, with gratitude and a clear mind. No one spoke. Outside the window, the late afternoon light had softened against the lawn. Somewhere downstairs, a clock chimed the hour. Annie heard each note as if it came from far away. Jonathan lowered the journal. His eyes finally met hers. For the first time, he did not look at the watch first. He looked at Annie. I owe you, he began, then stopped. Annie waited. The apology did not come. Not yet. His pride, his grief, his shame, whatever held him back still stood between them, but it was weaker now. She could see that. David rubbed a hand across his mouth. We still need to confirm the watch itself. Victoria turned on him softly. David, stop. No, Annie said. They looked at her. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, then straightened. Let him say it. Let all of you say whatever you still need to say, because I don't want anyone walking out of this room thinking maybe I fooled you. Jonathan's face tightened with something like pain. Annie held out her wrist, but not toward him. She turned it slightly so the watch caught the light. You can check it, she said. You can read numbers, call lawyers, open drawers, whatever you need. But I want something understood first. What? Jonathan asked. My honesty was not born when you found proof. The words settled over the room. Mrs. Clara looked down, and Lily stared at Annie as if she had just taught her something no workbook could hold. Jonathan nodded once, slowly. You're right, he said. It was still not enough, but it was the first step that did not sound like an accusation. Clara moved toward the writing desk near the window. There may be a receipt, or a record of the watch's serial number. Mrs. Whitmore kept documents in the lower drawer. Jonathan looked at Annie. Will you allow us to compare it? Annie studied him. The question mattered. Allow. Not demand. Not take it off. She nodded. I'll hold it. He accepted that without argument. And in that small permission, the room changed again. Not healed, not forgiven, but changed. Clara opened the lower drawer of the writing desk, and the old brass handle clicked in the quiet room. Inside were envelopes, cards, and folded papers tied with a blue ribbon. Annie stood beside Lily, the watch still on her wrist, while Jonathan stepped closer to the desk with the journal in his hand. Whatever they found next, one thing had already become clear. The story had never belonged only to the watch. It belonged to what the Whitmore family had been willing to believe about the girl wearing it. Mrs. Clara untied the blue ribbon with careful fingers, the way someone handles things that have outlived the person who saved them. The papers inside were not arranged like legal files. They were personal things, old receipts, appointment cards, small notes written in Eleanor Whitmore's slanted handwriting, a church bulletin folded around a dried leaf, and a photograph of Lily at a school concert. Jonathan stood beside the desk with his mother's journal still open in one hand. He looked as though he wanted to help Clara search but did not quite know how to touch the past without damaging it. David grew impatient first. There should be a certificate. Watches like that come with documentation. Victoria gave him a look. David, not everything Mother kept was organized for your convenience. I'm only saying if we're going to settle this, we should settle it properly. Annie heard the word properly and almost looked away. Properly, in this house, seemed to mean only one thing, not by her word alone. She stood near Lily, her wrist held close to her body. The watch ticked quietly beneath her sleeve. She had offered to let them check it, but even that felt strange now. Not because she had anything to hide, because the more proof they found, the more it showed how little her own voice had meant. Lily glanced up at her. "Are you okay?" Annie gave a small nod. "I'm standing." "That's not what I asked." For the first time since entering the bedroom, Annie almost smiled. "No, I'm not really okay." Lily looked down at the carpet. "I'm sorry. You didn't accuse me. I didn't stop them either." Annie studied the girl. Lily was young, but not empty-headed. She had seen more than the adults wanted her to understand. "Sometimes," Annie said softly, "the first time you see something unfair, you don't know what to do with it. The next time, you know faster." Lily nodded, holding that sentence like a note she wanted to remember. At the desk, Clara found a narrow envelope, yellowed at the edges. She turned it over and read the handwriting on the front. "Watch service records." Jonathan reached for it, then stopped himself and looked at Annie. "May I?" The question was small, but everyone noticed it. David's mouth tightened. Victoria lowered her eyes. Annie gave one nod. Clara handed Jonathan the envelope. He opened it and pulled out a folded receipt from a jeweler in downtown Chicago. The paper was old but preserved. Jonathan scanned it, then passed it to Victoria. "This is the service record from the year before Mother died." Victoria read the line. "Gold Whitmore custom wristwatch. Outer engraving. Eleanor Whitmore. Serial number." She stopped and looked toward Annie's wrist. David stepped forward. "Good. Now we check the number." Annie held up her hand before he came any closer. "Not you." David stopped. His face hardened. "Excuse me? You've already decided enough things about me today." Jonathan looked at his brother. "David, stay where you are." David stared at him, surprised. "You're serious?" "Yes." For a moment, the brothers looked at each other with years of family habit between them. David was used to pushing. Jonathan was used to allowing it when it served him. But now something had shifted, and David did not like where it left him. Mrs. Clara opened a small drawer in the writing desk and took out a magnifying glass with a brass handle. Mrs. Whitmore used this for reading prescription labels. She offered it to Annie first. Annie looked at her, then accepted it. The gesture mattered more than Clara probably knew. Annie sat on the edge of the reading chair only after Clara nodded toward it, not as if she were being permitted to rest, but as if she had a right to use the chair while the truth was being handled. She unfastened the watch strap slowly. No one moved. Even David stayed back. The watch came loose from her wrist and rested in her palm. Without the warmth of her skin beneath it, it looked smaller, older, almost fragile. Annie turned it over, searching for the tiny notch near the back casing. She had never opened it in front of so many people before. When she did open it at home, it was usually at night, after homework, when her mother was asleep and the apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Jonathan watched her hands. "They're shaking," Lily said, not to embarrass her, but because she noticed. Annie breathed out. "I know." Jonathan's face tightened. "You don't have to rush." Annie gave him a short look. "I'm not rushing for you." He accepted that. The back of the watch clicked open. Annie turned it toward the light from the window. Inside, along the inner rim, was a tiny engraved number. Clara leaned in but did not touch. Victoria moved closer beside her. Jonathan held the paper. Annie read the number slowly. Jonathan checked it against the receipt. The room waited. His eyes moved once, twice, from the paper to the watch and back again. Then his shoulders dropped. Barely, but enough. "It matches," he said. Victoria closed her eyes for a second. David looked irritated, then uneasy. "That proves it's her watch. It doesn't prove she meant to give it away." Annie's head lifted. "Your mother wrote that she did." David looked at her. "People write things when they're emotional." Clara turned on him. "And people say cruel things when they are cornered." The words were not loud, but they struck him cleanly. David's face flushed. "I'm trying to protect this family." "No," Clara said. "You are trying to protect being right." Jonathan looked at the service record again. "Enough, David." David scoffed. "So that's it? A journal entry and a serial number, and suddenly we trust her?" "No," Jonathan said. His voice was low now. "A journal entry, a serial number, a matching account, a detail about Mother's coat no photograph showed, and the fact that my mother herself wrote Annie's name." David had no answer ready. Annie should have felt relieved. Part of her did, but another part felt tired in a way proof could not fix. She looked at the watch in her palm and thought of Eleanor pressing it into her hand outside the pharmacy, saying something Annie had repeated in her mind every time she felt small. Keep it, not because it is expensive. Victoria stepped closer, her face no longer sharp. Annie. Annie looked up. Victoria seemed to struggle with the shape of the next words. I should not have said what I said downstairs. David shifted, as if uncomfortable with apology happening so near him. Victoria continued. I saw the watch. I saw you. And I made an assumption. Annie waited. Victoria added, it was wrong. The apology was not warm, but it was direct enough to matter. Annie nodded once. Thank you for saying that. Victoria looked as if she had expected either tears or anger, and did not quite know what to do with Annie's steadiness. Jonathan still held the journal and receipt. He had not apologized. Annie could feel it sitting between them like another unopened drawer. Lily spoke from beside her. Dad. Jonathan looked at his daughter. You should say something. The room tightened again. David muttered, Lily, stay out of this. Jonathan's eyes flashed toward him. Do not tell my daughter to ignore what she knows is right. David's mouth shut. Lily looked startled, then a little stronger. Jonathan turned back to Annie. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. His face had changed from suspicion to something more difficult. Shame. Maybe. Or grief, wearing shame's coat. He began. A sound came from the hall before he could finish. Footsteps, slow but firm. Marcus Hill appeared in the doorway, his driver's cap tucked beneath one arm. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Whitmore, he said. Mr. Reed is downstairs asking whether Miss Williams should still be removed from today's schedule. Annie felt her stomach turn. Removed. After everything they had read, after the serial number matched, after Eleanor's own handwriting had spoken from the page, someone downstairs was still trying to make her disappear. Jonathan's face hardened, but this time the anger did not point at Annie. Did he say removed? Marcus looked briefly at Annie before answering. Yes, sir. David rubbed his forehead. This is exactly why we should handle this privately. Annie stood, still holding the watch. No. Jonathan turned to her. Her voice was quiet, but there was nothing weak in it now. That word again, privately. Downstairs I was questioned in front of everyone who happened to be there. Your wife accused me. Your brother accused me. You let them. Now that there is proof, suddenly everyone wants privacy. Victoria looked down. David's jaw tightened. Annie fastened the watch back onto her wrist. Her fingers were still trembling, but she finished the clasp by herself. I'm not being removed from a job I didn't even get to start, she said. If Mr. Reed has questions, he can ask them where the accusation began. Jonathan looked at her for a long second. Then he nodded. You're right. Annie did not thank him. She should not have to thank a man for admitting what had become obvious. Jonathan handed the journal to Clara and folded the receipt carefully. Bring the journal. Bring the service record. Clara nodded. David said, Jonathan, think about the staff hearing this. Jonathan turned to him. They already heard enough to judge her. They can hear enough to correct themselves. Marcus stepped aside from the doorway. There was something in his eyes when he looked at Annie, not pity, not surprise. Recognition. As they left Eleanor's room, Annie glanced once more at the chair by the window, the folded blanket, the perfume bottle, the ordinary things a woman had left behind. She wondered what Eleanor would think of all this. Maybe she would be disappointed. Maybe she would be sad. Or maybe she would simply say that truth often arrives late because people make it walk uphill. At the top of the stairs, Lily moved closer to Annie. I still want you to tutor me, she said. Annie looked at her. Even after all this? Especially after all this. Annie did not know what to say to that, so she just gave a small nod. They descended the staircase together. Jonathan went first, carrying the receipt like a document that had become heavier than paper. Victoria followed with her hands folded tightly in front of her. David came behind, quiet and displeased. Clara carried the journal against her chest. Marcus walked at the back, making sure no one hurried Annie down those stairs like a problem. Below them, the living room waited, and this time, Annie was not walking back into it to explain herself. She was walking back with proof. Thomas Reed was standing near the living room entrance when they came down. He had a tablet tucked against his side, and the careful expression of a man who preferred problems to arrive already solved. Behind him, one of the security men waited by the hallway, not blocking the door, but close enough for Annie to notice. The sight of him made her stomach tighten again. Jonathan reached the bottom step and stopped. Mr. Reed. Thomas straightened. Sir, I thought it best to pause Miss Williams's employment until the matter is resolved. It is being resolved, Jonathan said. Thomas glanced at Annie's wrist. With respect, sir, there are liability concerns. She entered the property wearing a valuable item connected to the household. Until we understand how, we understand more than you do, Jonathan cut in. Thomas blinked. He was used to being interrupted by Jonathan, but not corrected in front of staff. David came down behind Victoria and said, Thomas is only doing his job. Annie looked at David. Funny how everyone's job today includes doubting me. David's mouth tightened. You are making this personal. It became personal when you looked at my shoes and decided they told you my character. No one answered quickly. Lily came down the last few steps and stood beside Annie, not touching her, not making a scene, just standing there. It was a small thing, but Annie felt it. Jonathan turned toward Thomas. My mother's journal confirms she met a young woman named Annie 2 years ago outside Harris Pharmacy. My mother wrote that Annie helped her during a robbery attempt and that she gave Annie the watch freely. Thomas's face changed just enough to show calculation. A journal? Mrs. Clara stepped forward with the blue book held against her chest, in Mrs. Whitmore's own handwriting. And the serial number matches the service record, Victoria added, quieter than before. Thomas looked from one face to another, sensing the ground had moved while he was downstairs. I see. Annie almost laughed. 2 words, I see, as if seeing were something he could choose once the powerful people gave him permission. Jonathan did not let him retreat that easily. You were going to remove her from the schedule. Temporarily, Thomas said, only to avoid unnecessary discomfort. Annie took 1 step forward. You keep using that word. Thomas looked at her, surprised she had spoken to him directly. Miss Williams, I assure you. No, Annie said. Her voice was not loud, but it made him stop. You don't get to assure me after deciding I should disappear. You didn't ask if I was uncomfortable when I was being questioned. You didn't ask if Lily was uncomfortable watching it. You only became worried about discomfort when the truth started making this house look bad. The security man lowered his eyes. Thomas's face reddened. That is not fair. Annie held his gaze. Neither was any of this. Jonathan watched her, and for the first time, there was no impatience in his expression. There was discomfort, yes, but he did not look away from it. Victoria set her phone on the side table as if she no longer wanted it in her hand. Thomas, I think Miss Williams deserves an apology. Thomas looked at her, then Jonathan, as if waiting for instruction. Annie noticed and felt a fresh sting. Even his apology needed approval, Jonathan said. Not because my wife said so. Because you were wrong. Thomas drew himself up. Miss Williams, I apologize if you felt... No, Jonathan said. Thomas stopped. Jonathan's voice hardened. Do not begin with if. A silence followed. David looked irritated. Clara looked almost relieved. Thomas swallowed. He faced Annie again, less polished this time. Miss Williams, I apologize for assuming the worst, and for suggesting you be removed before hearing the full truth. Annie listened. It was not perfect, but at least it had a shape that resembled responsibility. Thank you, she said. Thomas nodded, clearly eager to be done, but Annie was not. And I want you to understand something, she said. I came here for work, not charity, not trouble. Work. If I stay, I want to be treated like a tutor, not like someone being watched until she makes everyone comfortable. Lily glanced at her father. Jonathan nodded slowly. That is fair. David gave a short laugh. We are negotiating terms now? Jonathan turned to him. We are correcting a mistake. David's eyes narrowed. You're letting guilt steer the room. No, Jonathan said. For once, I am letting evidence do it. That quieted him. Clara placed the journal on the coffee table and opened it to the marked page. The room gathered around the truth without anyone announcing it. Annie stayed back at first, because she had no need to reread words she had lived. But Lily moved closer to the table, curious and careful. May I see? Lily asked. Jonathan hesitated. This is your grandmother's private writing. She wrote about Annie, Lily said. And everyone here talked about Annie. I think she should decide. That surprised Annie. So did the way everyone looked toward her. Annie thought of Eleanor in the pharmacy chair, tired but clear-eyed, giving away a watch that everyone in this house had treated like an object too important for a girl like Annie to touch. Maybe Eleanor had wanted the story told. Maybe that was why she wrote it down so plainly. She can read it, Annie said. Jonathan looked at her, a brief nod. All right. Lily bent over the journal. She read silently at first, her lips moving just a little. When she reached the line about the young black girl with a school backpack, she looked up at Annie. "You were scared and still helped her," Lily said. Annie shifted the folder in her arms. "Sometimes scared is all you get. You just decide what to do while it's there." Lily absorbed that. "My grandma really gave it to you." "Yes." "Then it's yours." The words were simple. A child could say them in 3 seconds. The adults had needed accusations, journals, serial numbers, and shame to arrive at the same place. Victoria sat on the edge of the sofa. She looked tired now. Not in body, but in face. "Annie, when I said you must have stolen it, I was wrong. I saw the watch and made the rest of the story myself." Annie did not rush to comfort her. "Why?" Victoria looked up. "Why what? Why was that the story you made?" The question was not angry, but it was direct enough to make Victoria go still. David muttered, "Good Lord." Jonathan glanced at him. "Let her answer." Victoria looked at Annie for a long moment. "Because I thought it was impossible. For me to have it? For you to have it honestly," Victoria admitted. The room changed again. Not dramatically, just enough for the truth to show its teeth. Annie nodded once, though the answer hurt. "Thank you for saying it plainly." Victoria's eyes shone, but she did not cry. "I am sorry." "I heard you," Annie said. "I'm going to need time before I know what to do with it." That answer seemed to unsettle Victoria more than forgiveness would have. Annie was glad. Forgiveness should not be treated like a napkin handed across a table. Jonathan moved toward the coffee table and picked up the service record. "There is another matter." Annie looked at him. "This watch is yours," he said. David immediately shifted. "Jonathan, it is hers," Jonathan repeated, without looking at him. "My mother gave it to her. The journal says so. The serial number confirms it is the same watch. No one in this house will question that again." Annie felt her throat tighten. She had known it was hers for 2 years. Hearing him say it in front of everyone still mattered, and she hated that it mattered. But it did. Jonathan turned to Thomas. "Miss Williams remains Lily's tutor if she chooses to continue. She will be paid for today in full, whether or not a lesson happens." Thomas nodded. "Yes, sir, and no one here will treat her as a risk." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "Understood." Annie looked at Jonathan. "You keep saying if I choose." "Yes. Do I really have a choice?" Jonathan's answer did not come quickly. "Yes. If I walk out right now, you won't call the agency and say I was difficult?" "No." "You won't tell people I caused trouble?" "No." "You won't make my mother hear some polite version of what happened that still makes me sound guilty?" Jonathan's face tightened. "No." Annie studied him. "I want that in writing." David threw up one hand. "This is absurd." Jonathan did not look at him. "Thomas, prepare a written confirmation that Miss Williams was not at fault, that the watch was given to her by my mother, and that her employment record will reflect no misconduct." Thomas hesitated only half a second. "I'll draft it." "Now," Jonathan said. Thomas left the room with the security man following him. The living room grew quieter after they were gone. Not peaceful, but less crowded with suspicion. Lily moved back to the study table and touched the edge of the algebra workbook. "We probably won't get much done today." Annie looked at the workbook, then at the watch on her wrist. Her first instinct was to leave. Her mother would understand. Anyone would. But Lily stood there with a pencil in her hand, trying to find something ordinary inside a day the adults had broken. "What are you working on?" Annie asked. Lily blinked. "Linear equations." Annie gave a small nod. "Those are not as scary as people make them sound." Lily's mouth almost smiled. "That's what the last tutor said. Then she gave me 30 problems," and checked her phone. "I only brought 12, Annie said. For the first time, the air loosened. Jonathan watched them from near the coffee table. Victoria sat very still. David looked as though he wanted to argue but had run out of places to stand. Clara went toward the kitchen. "I'll bring tea. And maybe something sweet. This house could use both." As she passed Annie, she paused. "Mrs. Whitmore would have liked seeing you here." Annie looked at her. "Even after all this?" "Especially after all this," Clara said. Annie turned back to Lily. She placed her folder on the table and opened it. The top page was bent from how tightly she had held it. But the questions were still there in blue ink. What subject feels hardest? What kind of books do you like? What helps you learn when you feel stuck? Lily read them upside down and pointed to the last one. "That one. What helps you learn when you feel stuck? Annie asked. Lily nodded. Annie pulled out the chair across from her. Usually someone patient. Lily sat down. Annie remained standing for a second longer. She looked at Jonathan. This doesn't mean everything is fine. I know, he said. I'm staying for Lily right now. Not because you apologized. You haven't. The words landed cleanly. Jonathan lowered his eyes. I know that too. Annie sat across from Lily and opened the workbook. For the first time since entering the Whitmore home, she was doing the job she had come to do. But the watch on her wrist kept ticking between the numbers and the silence, reminding every adult in the room that being proven innocent was not the same as never having been wounded. Clara returned with a tray of tea, 2 glasses of water, and a plate of shortbread cookies cut into neat squares. She set everything on the side table instead of the study table, as if she understood Annie did not want the lesson turned into a family gathering. Still, the smell of warm tea softened the room a little. Not enough to erase what had happened, but enough to let everyone breathe without sounding guilty. Lily sat across from Annie with her pencil ready, though her eyes kept drifting to the watch. Annie noticed and tapped the workbook gently. The equation is over here. I know, Lily said. I'm not trying to stare. It's okay. Lily looked embarrassed. I just keep thinking Grandma gave it to you and nobody knew. Annie glanced toward Jonathan. He was standing near the fireplace with the service record in his hand, not reading it anymore, just holding it. Victoria sat on the sofa, quieter than before. David had moved to the window and looked out at the lawn as though the trees had personally offended him. Sometimes people do good things without announcing them, Annie said. My grandma did that, Lily said. I think she did. Jonathan looked up then, but Annie kept her attention on the page. All right, she said. Linear equations. When you see something like this, don't panic because it has letters. The letter is just the part we don't know yet. Lily gave a small shrug. That's the part I hate. Most people do. Unknown things make people nervous. The sentence landed in the room in a way Annie had not intended. Victoria looked down at her hands. Jonathan's grip tightened on the paper. Annie pretended not to notice. So we don't fight the unknown. We isolate it. Lily frowned at the worksheet. Like getting X alone? Exactly. You move everything else out of the way until the truth is standing by itself. For a few seconds, Lily only stared at the equation. Then she looked at Annie. That sounds like today. Annie breathed out through her nose, almost a laugh. A little, except today everybody moved the wrong things first. Annie leaned back. That's a good way to say it. David turned from the window. Are we having a math lesson or a moral one? Lily's pencil stopped. Jonathan looked at his brother. David spread his hands. What? I'm only saying the child has schoolwork. Annie looked at David, then at Lily. He's right about one thing. You do have schoolwork. Lily whispered. I don't like when he talks like that. Then don't learn it from him, Annie said, gently enough that it did not sound like an attack, but clearly enough that David heard. Victoria looked toward David. Leave her alone. He stared at his sister-in-law. Now everyone's taking instructions from the tutor. No, Victoria said. I'm taking instruction from the last hour. That quieted him more than anger would have. Annie returned to the worksheet. Subtract 3 from both sides. Lily wrote carefully. Her handwriting was neat, but slow. Each number shaped like she did not trust it to stay put. Good, Annie said. Now divide by 2. Lily did it, then looked up. X equals 6. There you go. That was it. That was it. I thought it would be harder. A lot of things feel harder before someone explains them without making you feel stupid. Lily looked at her father. Jonathan heard it. Annie could tell by the way he lowered his eyes. Clara poured tea into cups and set one near Annie. Sugar? No, thank you. You sure? Annie almost said she was fine out of habit. Then she remembered she had not eaten since late morning. 1, please. Clara added a sugar cube and slid the cup within reach. The gesture was small, but after being treated like a problem, being served tea like a guest almost made Annie uncomfortable. Victoria noticed. Do you take milk? Annie looked at her. Sometimes. Victoria poured a little milk into the cup, then stopped. Tell me if that's too much. It's fine, Annie said. The politeness between them felt thin but real, like a bridge made of paper, not strong enough yet, but better than empty air. Jonathan finally moved from the fireplace. Miss Williams. Annie did not look away from Lily's worksheet right away. Yes? I need to make a call. David straightened. To the agency? Jonathan's eyes stayed on Annie. To Mr. Reed. And then to our family attorney. The written statement should be proper. Annie heard the word attorney and felt her shoulders tense. Jonathan noticed. Not against you. I've heard that kind of sentence before, Annie said. Victoria set the milk down. He means to protect you. Annie looked at her. People keep saying things are for my protection after they've already hurt me. Victoria accepted that without arguing. Jonathan's voice softened, not dramatically, but enough. Then let me say it clearly. I will put in writing that you did not steal the watch, that my mother gave it to you, and that what happened here today was the result of my error. David moved away from the window. Your error? Jonathan turned to him. Yes. You're going to put that in writing? Yes. For a tutor you met an hour ago? For a young woman I accused without listening. The room went quiet. Annie looked at him then. There it was. Almost an apology. Not full, not clean, but closer than before. David's face hardened. You're letting guilt make you careless. Jonathan folded the receipt once along its original crease. I was careless when I saw the watch, and decided the person wearing it must be guilty. David looked stunned, as if Jonathan had slapped him without moving. Clara stood very still. Lily smiled a little, but quickly hid it behind her pencil. Jonathan took out his phone and stepped into the hallway. His voice carried just enough for them to hear pieces of it. Thomas, prepare a statement now. No. Not neutral language. Use her full name. Annie Williams. Yes. It should say no misconduct. No. She is not being released. Annie lowered her eyes to the workbook, but the numbers blurred. Lily leaned closer. That's good, right? It's a start. Why don't you sound happy? Annie thought about that, because sometimes when people finally stop pushing you underwater, they expect you to thank them for letting you breathe. Lily's face became serious. Annie softened her tone. I'm not saying your dad is doing nothing. He is doing something, but I'm still the one who had to go through it. Lily nodded slowly. I think I get it. I hope you do, Annie said. Not because you should feel bad, because someday you may be in a room where someone else is being treated unfairly, and I want you to know sooner than the adults did today. Victoria's eyes lifted to Annie. This time there was no defensiveness in them. David muttered, She's 12. Annie turned to him. Old enough to see, old enough to learn. Clara added, Children learn from silence too, Mr. David. That is why adults should be careful with it. David looked away again. Jonathan returned a few minutes later. Thomas is drafting the statement. The attorney will review it tonight. Annie nodded. Thank you. He seemed to know the thank you was for the action, not for the wound. There's something else. Annie waited. My mother's journal mentions a letter. Jonathan glanced toward Clara. Not in the entry we read, but on the next page. She wrote that if she ever found the girl again, she wanted to give her a note. Clara's brow tightened. A note? Jonathan opened the journal again and read silently for a moment. She wrote, I have put the letter in the rosewood box until I can find her. Victoria's eyes moved toward the stairs. The rosewood box from her writing desk? Clara nodded. I saw it upstairs. Lower shelf. Left side. David sighed. Now another search. Jonathan looked at Annie. You don't have to continue with this today. Annie touched the edge of the watch. If the letter was meant for me, I want to see it. Victoria stood. Then we should get it. David gave her a sharp look. You too? Victoria met his stare. Yes, me too. Lily pushed back her chair. Can I come? Jonathan hesitated. Annie spoke before he did. Only if your father says yes, and only if you understand this is not a game. I know, Lily said. Jonathan looked at his daughter for a long moment, then nodded. You may come. Annie closed the workbook. The lesson had barely begun, but it had done more than solve for X. It had shown Lily that truth was not always handed down by the loudest person in the room. They walked back toward the stairs, slower this time. Annie no longer felt dragged through the house by accusation. Still, every step reminded her that this place had questioned her before it welcomed her. At the foot of the staircase, Marcus appeared from the hallway. Everything all right? Jonathan answered. We're going back to Mother's room. Marcus looked at Annie. You okay to keep going? The question was simple, but it was the first one that placed her comfort at the center. Annie nodded. I want to know what she wrote. Marcus stepped aside. Then I'll wait here. David said, You don't need to stand guard. Marcus's expression did not change. I'm not standing guard for you. David's face tightened, but Jonathan was already moving. Upstairs, Eleanor's room waited with its quiet chair, its folded blanket, and its drawers full of things no one had asked enough questions about. Clara went directly to the writing desk, knelt carefully, and opened the lower cabinet. "There," Victoria said, pointing. Clara lifted out a small rosewood box with brass corners. She placed it on the desk. The lid was smooth from years of use, and a faint scent of lavender rose when she opened it. Inside were old greeting cards, a rosary, a pressed white flower, and one cream envelope. The front read in Eleanor's handwriting, "For Annie, the brave girl from Harris Pharmacy." Annie stopped breathing. Lily whispered, "She really knew you." Annie reached for the envelope, then paused and looked at Jonathan, not for permission, to make sure he understood that this, at least, was not his first. Jonathan stepped back. "It's yours," he said. Annie picked up the envelope with both hands. For the first time all day, nobody asked her to prove anything before she opened what had been meant for her. Annie held the envelope so carefully that the paper barely bent between her fingers. The room had gone quiet again, but this silence felt different from the one downstairs. It did not press on her, like accusation. It waited. Her name sat on the front in Eleanor Whitmore's handwriting. "For Annie, the brave girl from Harris Pharmacy." Annie read it twice, then a third time, because part of her still could not believe a woman she had known for less than half an hour had remembered her long enough to write those words. Lily stood beside the desk, hands folded in front of her. Victoria had moved closer but kept a respectful distance. David lingered near the door, his face set in a way that made him look less certain than he wanted to appear. Jonathan stood a few feet away, still and quiet, his eyes not on the watch now but on the envelope. Mrs. Clara touched Annie's shoulder lightly. "Take your time, sweetheart." Annie nodded, though her throat had tightened too much for speech. She slipped one finger beneath the flap and opened the envelope. The paper inside was folded once. It carried the faint scent of lavender, the same scent that lived in the room, in the blanket, in the drawers, in the pieces of a woman's life that had been kept after she was gone. Annie unfolded the letter. The first line made her stop. "My dear Annie." She pressed her lips together. Lily whispered, "Do you want someone else to read it?" Annie shook her head. "No. I can." Her voice came out thin, but it came out. She read silently at first. "My dear Annie, if this letter ever finds you, then perhaps the watch did what I hoped it might do. I have thought of you often since that day outside Harris Pharmacy. I did not know your last name. I did not know where you lived. I only knew that when I was frightened and old and embarrassed to need help, you came toward me while others looked away." Annie blinked hard. The words blurred, then cleared. Jonathan looked down. Annie kept reading, but now aloud because the room needed to hear it too. "I should have asked you to stay. I should have made sure you got home safely. But you were scared. And I recognized that fear. Not the fear of those boys, but the fear of being noticed by the wrong people for doing the right thing." Mrs. Clara closed her eyes for a second. Victoria's face changed. The words seemed to reach a place in her that earlier arguments had not. Annie's hand shook, but she continued. "I gave you my watch because I wanted you to have proof that someone saw you clearly that day. Not as a problem. Not as a stranger from another side of town. Not as a child who should know her place. I saw a young woman with courage in her bones and kindness in her hands." Lily looked at Annie with wide eyes, not crying, not speaking, just taking the words in. David shifted near the door. "Mother always did right dramatically." Jonathan turned toward him so quickly that David stopped. "Don't," Jonathan said. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. David looked away. Annie did not stop reading. She could not. Eleanor's voice on the page had become stronger than the room. "The watch is yours. I gave it freely. If anyone in my family questions that, tell them I was in full possession of my mind, my property, and my gratitude. Tell Jonathan, if he is there, that I hope he listens before he judges. He is a good son in many ways, but grief and success have made him impatient with ordinary people's truths." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He looked as though every word had found him unprepared. Victoria glanced at him, then back at Annie. Annie read the next line more slowly. "If he has frightened you, I am sorry. If he has made you feel small, I am sorrier still. A house can be large and still fail to make room for mercy." The room stayed still. Annie had to lower the letter for a moment. The sentence landed too close to what had happened. Eleanor had written it before knowing the day would come true almost exactly. Jonathan took one step forward, then stopped himself. "Annie, She shook her head once. Not harshly, but enough. Let me finish. He stepped back. Annie lifted the letter again. I once told you the watch might take you where you needed to be. I did not mean wealth. I did not mean favor. I meant that one day you may enter a room where your truth is doubted, and I wanted you to carry something that could speak when people refused to hear you. I wish that were not necessary. But I have lived long enough to know that good people are not always believed quickly, especially when they are young, poor, or black. No one moved. David's face hardened at the word, then softened into discomfort. Victoria's eyes lowered. Jonathan looked at Annie as if seeing, for the first time, not only what he had done but the pattern his actions belonged to. Annie's voice trembled on the last paragraph. Keep the watch, Annie. Not for its gold. Not for the name on its rim. Keep it because courage should be remembered in families that are not your own. And if my son ever stands before you with suspicion in his eyes, I pray he becomes man enough to ask forgiveness before it is too late. Annie stopped. There was one final line. She read it quietly. With gratitude, Eleanor Whitmore. For a while no one spoke. The house itself seemed to settle around them, floorboards and old wood and the quiet breath of people who had no place to hide from what had just been read. Annie folded the letter carefully, but she did not put it back in the envelope yet. She held it against the watch on her wrist, paper against gold, proof against proof. Jonathan's face had gone pale. Victoria whispered, She knew. Jonathan did not answer. She knew you might react this way, Victoria said. That made him look at his wife. Victoria's voice was not accusing, but it was not gentle either. She knew this family might question the girl before thanking her. David took a breath. This is becoming unfair. Annie turned toward him. Unfair to who? He opened his mouth, then stopped. Annie's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady now. Because I would like to know. Was it unfair when you said I couldn't afford the watch? Was it unfair when I had to explain why I needed a job? Was it unfair when everyone looked at me like the only possible answer was theft? David looked at Jonathan, but Jonathan did not rescue him. Annie stepped closer to the desk and set the letter down, smoothing it once with her palm. I didn't ask Mrs. Whitmore to write this. I didn't ask her to give me the watch. I didn't even know who she was. I helped an old woman because she needed help. Her voice cracked, but she kept it, and somehow that still wasn't enough until a dead woman wrote it down. Lily looked at her father. Dad. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were red. You're right, he said to Annie. The words were quiet. Annie waited, because after everything, she was done filling in meaning for people who should know how to say what they meant. Jonathan looked at the letter, then at the watch, then finally at her. You were right from the beginning, he said. And I was wrong from the beginning. David stared at him. Victoria's shoulders lowered as if she had been holding a breath for an hour. Annie did not say thank you. Truth was not a gift he was giving her. Jonathan took another breath. I accused you in my home. My brother insulted you. My wife doubted you. My staff prepared to remove you. And I allowed all of it to happen because the story in my head was more convenient than the truth standing in front of me. His voice roughened on the last few words. Annie could see him fighting for control. But the control no longer looked noble. It looked like another kind of hiding. Mrs. Clara said softly, Mr. Whitmore. He nodded, but did not look away from Annie. I owe you an apology, he said. Annie's answer came before she had time to soften it. Not up here. Jonathan stilled. She pointed toward the hall, toward the stairs, toward the living room where the first accusation had been made. You didn't question me privately. You didn't let me be embarrassed privately. So please don't apologize privately. Just because now everyone knows I told the truth. The room absorbed that. Victoria looked at Jonathan. David looked away. Clara's expression held quiet approval. Lily stood very still, learning more than any adult had planned to teach. Jonathan nodded once. You're right, he said again, and this time the words seemed to cost him more. Annie picked up the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. I want to keep this. It was written for you, Jonathan said. Of course, David muttered. We should make a copy for family records. Jonathan turned to him. Later. Annie looked at David. You can have a copy, but not before I do. David did not answer. Jonathan stepped toward the door, then paused. Everyone who heard the accusation should hear the apology. Victoria nodded. Yes. David looked as if he wanted to object, but Clara spoke before he could. Mrs. Whitmore would expect no less. That ended it. They left Eleanor's room together. Annie walked with the envelope in one hand and the watch on her wrist. This time, she did not trail behind. Lily walked beside her. Clara followed close, carrying the journal. Jonathan walked ahead, but not as if leading a suspect. He walked like a man going toward a debt he could no longer postpone. At the top of the stairs, Annie glanced once back at Eleanor's room. The door remained open. The rosewood box sat on the desk, its lid lifted, no longer hiding what had been saved for her. Downstairs, voices quieted as they approached. Thomas Reed stood near the coffee table with a printed page in his hand. Marcus waited by the hallway. The security man was gone. Thomas looked relieved to see Jonathan. "Sir, I have the statement." Jonathan did not take it yet. "Good," he said. "But before paper, there will be words." Thomas blinked. "Sir?" Jonathan turned toward Annie in the same living room where he had first asked about the watch. His face broke a little then, not fully, but enough for everyone to see the grief beneath the pride. "Miss Williams," he said, his voice low, "I am going to say this where I should have listened." Annie stood still. The watch ticked once against her wrist, and this time, no one interrupted her silence. Jonathan stood in front of Annie, and for the first time that afternoon, the room did not belong to him. It should have. His name was on the gate, the deed, the paychecks, the charitable plaques in the hallway, the framed newspaper articles near the study. Every person in that living room had learned to move around his moods, his schedule, his rules. But now his mother's letter sat in Annie's hand. The watch ticked on Annie's wrist, and the truth had chosen a side. Thomas Reed held the printed statement but did not offer it again. Victoria stood near the sofa with both hands clasped in front of her. David remained by the fireplace, stiff and silent. Clara stood a few steps behind Annie with Eleanor's journal pressed to her chest. Marcus waited near the hall, his face calm, his eyes watchful. Lily stood beside the study table, not speaking, but not looking away either. Jonathan looked at each of them before returning his eyes to Annie. "I accused you," he said, "not with enough proof, not with enough patience, not with enough decency." Annie held still. The words were a beginning, but she had learned in the last 2 hours that beginnings could still turn away from the truth if no one held them there. Jonathan swallowed. "When I saw that watch, I did not ask who you were. I did not ask what my mother might have done, or why she might have done it. I saw you wearing something expensive, something connected to this family, and I let suspicion answer before you could." David shifted at the word suspicion. Jonathan noticed but kept going. "My brother insulted you. My wife doubted you. My staff prepared to remove you from a job you had not even started. I did not stop them soon enough." Victoria lowered her eyes. Thomas looked at the paper in his hand. Jonathan's voice dropped. "And I am sorry." The room waited for Annie to soften, but she did not. Not because she wanted him to suffer, because she was trying to understand whether the apology was for what he had done or for being caught by the truth. She looked at him and said, "For what?" Jonathan blinked. Annie's voice stayed quiet. "People say they're sorry all the time, Mr. Whitmore. Sometimes they mean they're sorry it got uncomfortable. Sometimes they mean they're sorry the proof showed up. So I'm asking, what are you sorry for?" David muttered, "This is unnecessary." Jonathan turned to him. "No, it is necessary." David's jaw tightened, but he said no more. Jonathan faced Annie again. His face had lost the polished hardness it carried downstairs. He looked older now. Not weak, but stripped of the certainty that had made him dangerous. "I am sorry," he said, "for treating you like a thief." Annie's throat tightened, but she did not speak. "I am sorry for letting your clothes, your job, your age, and the color of your skin become evidence in my mind before I had any facts." Victoria looked up sharply at that, as if hearing it said so plainly made the room smaller. Jonathan continued, "I am sorry for making you defend your name in front of my daughter, my family, and my staff. I am sorry that my mother trusted you better than I did, and she had only known you for minutes." The last sentence caught in his throat. Annie saw it then, not the billionaire, not the man who owned the house. A son standing in the wreckage of something his mother had tried to prevent. He looked toward the envelope in Annie's hand. "She wrote that if I ever stood before you with suspicion in my eyes, she hoped I would become man enough to ask forgiveness before it was too late." His eyes reddened. "I don't know if I am too late," he said, "but I am asking." No one moved. Annie looked down at the watch. The gold rim with Eleanor's name had felt like a burden when Jonathan first pointed at it. Now it felt like Eleanor was still in the room, not as a ghost, not as a memory trapped in expensive furniture, but as a woman who had written the truth before anyone knew it would be needed. Annie's voice came slowly. I hear your apology. Jonathan nodded once, as though even that was more than he deserved. I'm not ready to make you feel better about it, she added. His face tightened, but he accepted it. I understand. I don't think you do, Annie said, not unkindly. But maybe you can start. Lily looked at her father, waiting to see what he would do with that. Jonathan turned to Thomas. Read the statement. Thomas hesitated. Now? Yes, out loud. Thomas looked uncomfortable, but he lifted the paper. This statement confirms that Miss Annie Williams has committed no misconduct in the Whitmore residence. The gold watch in her possession was given to her freely by Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore following an incident at Harris Pharmacy 2 years ago, during which Miss Williams assisted Mrs. Whitmore. Miss Williams remains eligible to serve as tutor to Lily Whitmore, and no negative report will be made to the tutoring agency or any third party. Annie listened carefully. Add something, Jonathan said. Thomas looked up. Sir? Add that the accusation made against her was unfounded. Thomas nodded. Yes, sir. And add that I made it. The room became very still. David stepped forward. Jonathan. Jonathan did not look at him. Add it. Thomas swallowed. Yes, sir. Annie watched Jonathan then. That mattered. Not because it erased what happened, but because it put the weight where it belonged. Not on vague misunderstanding. Not on confusion. On him. Victoria took a breath. Annie. Annie turned. Victoria looked as though she had been arranging words in her mind and finding each version too clean. I owe you more than what I said upstairs. I looked at you and decided what kind of story you fit into. I did not ask myself why that story came so easily. Annie waited. Victoria continued. That was ugly, and it was mine. I am sorry. There was no if, no discomfort, no softened edge. Annie nodded. Thank you. David gave a sharp sigh, but Clara looked at him before he could speak. The old housekeeper did not say a word. She did not have to. Jonathan turned toward his brother. David. David's face hardened. What? You have something to say. I raised a concern. You insulted her. I described reality. Annie looked at him. No. You described what you thought reality should be for someone like me. David's eyes flicked toward her, and for once, he did not have a quick answer. Marcus spoke from near the hall. A man can be wrong without losing his whole life, Mr. David, but he has to stop defending the wrong long enough to step out of it. David looked at Marcus as though he had forgotten the driver was there. Jonathan said, Apologize. David's face flushed. You're ordering me to apologize to the tutor? Lily's voice cut in, small but clear. Her name is Annie. Everyone looked at her. Lily did not cry. She did not shrink. Her hands gripped the back of the chair, but her eyes stayed on her uncle. You keep saying the tutor like she isn't standing here. Annie felt something loosen in her chest. David looked from Lily to Annie. The silence stretched until it became clear even he could not push past it without looking smaller than he wanted to be. He cleared his throat. Miss Williams, I should not have assumed you stole the watch. Annie waited. David added, stiffly, and I should not have said you could not afford it. Why? Annie asked. David stared at her. Annie held his gaze. Why shouldn't you have said it? His mouth tightened. Because it was insulting. And? David looked toward Jonathan, but Jonathan did not help him. Finally, he said, because your need to work does not prove dishonesty. Annie nodded once. Thank you. She did not smile. He did not deserve one. Clara moved to the table and placed Eleanor's journal beside Thomas's statement. Mrs. Whitmore used to say manners are what people use when character is still catching up. Victoria gave a faint, sad laugh. She said that to me once. She said it to all of you, Clara replied. Jonathan lowered himself into the armchair near the fireplace. It was the first time he had sat since the whole thing began. He looked suddenly tired, as if the house had been running on his certainty and now there was none left to hold him upright. Lily picked up her pencil again. Can Annie still teach me? The question was so ordinary that it almost startled everyone. Annie looked at the workbook still open on the study table. Equations waited there, calm and solvable. Numbers did not care about family pride. They did not accuse. They did not look at shoes or skin or old backpacks. Jonathan looked at Annie. That is entirely her choice. Annie appreciated the answer, though part of her wished it had come earlier, before proof, before tears, before Eleanor had to speak from a letter. Lily turned to her. I'd understand if you wanted to leave. Annie looked at the girl and saw no demand there. Only honesty. I should probably go home, Annie said. Lily nodded, but disappointment passed over her face. Annie added, but I can stay for 20 minutes. Enough to finish the first page. Lily's face brightened just a little. Jonathan stood. You do not have to work today. I know, Annie said. I'm not doing it for you. He accepted that too. Clara quietly brought Annie's tea closer to the study table. It had cooled, but Annie took a sip anyway. The sugar sat at the bottom, sweet and grainy. Thomas folded the statement. I'll revise this immediately. Bring it to Miss Williams when it is done, Jonathan said. She reads it before anyone signs it. Thomas nodded and left. David stayed by the fireplace, silent now. Victoria sat with her hands in her lap, watching Lily open her workbook. Marcus stepped back into the hall, but not far. Annie sat across from Lily and set Eleanor's envelope carefully beside her folder. All right, she said, pointing to the next problem. What do we do first when something looks complicated? Lily looked at the equation, then at the adults around the room. We move everything that doesn't belong until the truth is alone. Annie nodded. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. That's right, Annie said. Now show me. Lily bent over the page and began to write. The watch ticked beside the lesson. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily. This time, no one questioned why it was there. The first page took 23 minutes. Annie knew because she watched the clock on the mantel more than once, not because Lily was slow, but because every minute in that room carried 2 lessons at the same time. One was algebra. The other was how adults behaved after they had been wrong. Lily worked carefully, erasing only when she had to. She did not ask for answers. She asked why a step mattered, why a number moved, why the same thing had to be done to both sides. Annie liked that. It meant Lily was not just trying to finish the page. She wanted the page to make sense. That's better, Annie said, looking over the last equation. You stopped guessing. Lily tapped the pencil against the paper. I was guessing because I thought math was trying to trick me. Math doesn't trick you. People do that. The words slipped out before Annie could soften them. Lily looked up. Across the room, Jonathan heard it too. He was standing near the fireplace again, but differently now, not guarding the room, not controlling it. His hands were in his pockets. His eyes stayed mostly on the floor. Annie looked back at the worksheet. Sorry. That was not about the problem. It can be, Lily said. Annie gave her a small smile. Maybe. Thomas Reed returned with the revised statement printed on thick white paper, the kind used for contracts and invitations. He did not approach Annie the way he had earlier. This time he came to the edge of the study table and held the page out with both hands. Miss Williams, he said, Mr. Whitmore asked that you read it before anyone signs. Annie took it. She read slowly, line by line. It confirmed that Annie Williams had committed no misconduct, that the gold watch had been given to her freely by Eleanor Whitmore, that Jonathan Whitmore had made an unfounded accusation, and that no negative report would be made to the tutoring agency, Annie's mother, future employers, or any third party. That last part made her pause. She had not asked for future employers. Jonathan must have thought of that himself. Or maybe Clara had. Either way, it mattered. False stories had legs. They walked into places long after the truth got tired. Annie looked up. Add one more thing. Thomas held his pen ready. Yes? That I was hired based on my qualifications, and my position remains available if I choose to continue. Thomas nodded and wrote it down. David, still near the window, muttered, At this rate, she should send us an invoice. Jonathan looked at him. David, leave. The room froze. David straightened. What? You've said enough today. You're throwing me out of my brother's house over this? Jonathan's voice stayed level. I'm asking you to leave my living room because you still think being embarrassed is worse than what you helped do to her. David looked at Victoria, perhaps expecting support. She did not give it. He gave a short laugh with no humor in it. Fine. Enjoy the performance. He walked toward the hall. Annie did not watch him go at first, but then she turned. Mr. Whitmore. David stopped, irritated. What now? You forgot the last part. His face tightened. What last part? You apologized for saying I couldn't afford the watch, but you never apologized for enjoying the moment when you thought I had stolen it. David's mouth opened, then shut. The room went so quiet Annie could hear the paper in Thomas's hand shift. David's eyes moved away from hers. For the first time all afternoon, he looked not angry, not clever, but exposed. You don't know what I enjoyed, he said. No, Annie said. but I know what it feels like when someone finds comfort in having a reason to look down on you." David swallowed. He did not apologize. He did not defend himself either. He left without another word. The front door closed a minute later. Lily stared at the hallway. He's always like that when he's wrong. Jonathan looked at his daughter. So was I. That surprised her. Annie looked down at the statement again, pretending not to feel the weight of that sentence. Thomas cleared his throat. "I'll revise and reprint. Use plain language," Annie said. Thomas blinked. "Plain? Yes, not legal fog. If someone reads it later, I want them to know exactly what happened." Jonathan nodded. "Plain language." Thomas left again. Victoria rose from the sofa and walked toward the study table. Annie stiffened before she could stop herself. Victoria noticed and stopped a few feet away. "I won't crowd you," she said. Annie nodded. Victoria looked at Lily's worksheet. "You did all of these?" "With Annie," Lily said. Victoria's mouth softened. "Good." Lily tilted her head. "Mom, why did you think Annie stole it?" Victoria looked at Annie, then at her daughter. It would have been easy to say she was confused, that the watch startled her, that she was protecting the family. Annie could almost see those answers forming and being rejected. "Because I judged too quickly," Victoria said. "Because I saw what she was wearing and where she worked, and I let that matter more than what she was saying." Lily frowned. "But you tell me not to judge people like that." "I know. Then why did you?" Victoria sat down slowly on the arm of the sofa. "Because adults sometimes believe rules more easily when we are teaching them than when we have to live by them." Lily looked at Annie. "Is that true?" Annie thought about her answer. "Sometimes, but a good adult admits it when a child catches them failing." Victoria looked at Annie with a tired gratitude that Annie was not ready to accept fully, but she did not reject it either. Jonathan moved toward the mantel and picked up a framed photograph. Eleanor stood beside him in the picture, one hand tucked under his arm. He stared at it for a long moment. "She wanted to tell me," he said. No one asked what he meant. The answer was in the journal, in the letter, in the years he had been busy. Jonathan continued, not looking away from the photo. "She tried to tell me about you. I remember now. She said there was a girl from the pharmacy. I told her I had a call in 10 minutes. Annie stayed silent. She said, 'Jonathan, one day you may need to know this.' I kissed her forehead and told her we would talk later." He swallowed. Later became her funeral. Victoria closed her eyes. Lily's pencil stopped moving. Jonathan set the photograph down carefully. "When I saw the watch today, I thought I was defending her. But all I did was prove I still wasn't listening." The words should have made Annie feel something like satisfaction. Instead, they made her sad. Not for herself only, but for Eleanor, who had written letters to the future because the present had no time for her. Clara spoke from the side table. "Your mother did not like to force people to listen. She believed they should choose it." Jonathan gave a small, broken breath. "I chose late. Late is not nothing," Clara said, "but it is still late." Annie looked at Clara. The older woman did not soften the truth to make the rich man more comfortable. Annie respected her for that. Thomas returned with the revised statement. This time, the language was clear. Annie read it twice. It said exactly what needed to be said. Jonathan signed first. Victoria signed as a witness. Clara signed as witness to Eleanor's journal and letter. Thomas signed as household manager. Then he offered the pen to Annie. She looked at it. "Why do I sign?" "To acknowledge receipt," Thomas said quickly. "Not agreement with what happened." Annie read the line. It said she had received the statement, and a copy would be provided to her before she left. She signed. Annie